Homicide 1915. The case of 45-year-old George Marshall. George Marshall was convicted of the murder of his girlfriend, 45-year-old Alice Anderson, and sentenced to death. He cut her throat at 70 Mina Road, Walworth, on the 3rd of July 1915. George Marshall had been a barman employed at the Duke of York public house in Newington and had separated from his wife in 1902. He met Alice Anderson, who was a widow, whilst working at the Duke of York public house. She had been living in 2 rooms at 70 Mina Road, where she had been for the previous 3 years, whilst George Marshall had 1 room there, having moved in about 12 months earlier, and for the previous 11 months they had been living together in Alice Anderson's room as man and wife. George Marshall had previously asked Alice Anderson to marry him, but she had refused on the grounds that his wife might still be alive. However, George Marshall had suspected that Alice Anderson had been taking other men to his room during the day. On Saturday the 3rd of July 1915, George Marshall served customs until 10 p.m, which was closing time, and then did cellar work until 10:40 p.m, and then went home at about 11 p.m. Shortly after arriving home, George Marshall called up the landlord of the house and asked him whether he thought that a man and woman had been on the bed in his room, pointing to the impressions and marks of feet on the counterpane. However, Alice Anderson, who was in the room with them at the time, told the landlord to take no notice of George Marshall. They had been fully dressed at the time. However, 10 minutes later, the landlord, who had gone back to bed, heard a thud at the bottom of the stairs and found Alice Anderson lying there dead in her nightdress. She had a large stab wound to the right side of her neck extending to her spine through the trachea and carotid artery, as well as 4 other smaller wounds to her neck and shoulders. She also had a small wound on her left forearm, as though she had tried to ward off the blows. The doctor that had examined her said that he thought that Alice Anderson had been in bed when she was stabbed, and that she had managed to escape from the room and had then fallen down the stairs. When George Marshall was arrested, he said, "I've made a good job of it now. I'm satisfied. I ain't half give her a gash. I meant to do it, the wicked cow. I will give her to make this place a knocking shop. I have got the knife in my pocket." At his trial, George Marshall's plea of guilty was withdrawn, and a defence of drunkenness and provocation was set up. He said that he had had more to drink when he got home, but the trial heard that there was no evidence of drunkenness sufficient to reduce the crime to manslaughter. He also alleged that Alice Anderson had provoked him by saying that he thought too much of his bastard daughters. He said that he had been about to wind the clock at the time and had had his knife in his hand to open the clock when she said it, and said that he had been so enraged that he cut her throat. However, it was noted that he had not mentioned the abuse of his daughters before, and it was thought that it was fairly certain that jealousy and his suspicions about the other men were the cause of the quarrel and the real motives for the murder. George Marshall was convicted with no recommendation to mercy. He appealed, but his appeal was dismissed, and he was executed at Wandsworth on the 17th of August, 1915.